The second petition of the Lord's Prayer is, give us this day our daily bread, that we're going to talk about today in your life group setting. Give us this day our daily bread. It's interesting what Jesus didn't say. He didn't say, give us our retirement well funded. He didn't say, give us next month's mortgage payment. And sometimes I fast forward, and when I fast forward and look at the long term of my life, sometimes it creates panic in me. Sometimes it generates worry, and worry generates fear for me. And fear so often paralyzes or leads me to a place of not trusting, not resting in God. And when Jesus was telling his disciples, ask God for this day's provision. Ask God for the provision for this next 24 hours, understanding that the climate and the culture that Jesus was living in the flesh was an agricultural community. It was an agricultural context by and large. And so many of the laborers in that day, that's what they were known as, day laborers. They were one step above slaves. And if they didn't have their pay each day, at the end of each day, if they didn't receive the pay from the farmer or from the person they worked for, they weren't able to buy food for that day. And that's an incredibly deep piece that we have to understand, that there was a tangible dependence on God in that culture. There was a tangible respect and a tangible need for God that sometimes we miss in our world because we have an excess. And when I was preaching this particular sermon, I remember saying, what does that prayer piece look like? Give us this day our daily bread in a country, in a climate of excess, where we have more than we really need, where we have more than what we really can even use in a day or in a month or in a year. It's incredible how many people just have an abundance, and we're one of those. You know, if you have anything in your freezer, by world standards, you are blessed beyond measure. If you have one working vehicle, by world standards, you're in the upper echelon of wealth. And so what does that give us this day or daily provision look like? Well, when he was teaching that to the disciples, who also studied the Old Testament, they would have been versed in the Torah. They read the Exodus 16 account of when the Israelites came out of Egypt. They had crossed the Red Sea. God had already worked miracles. God had already done some incredible things in the nation's history to move them from slavery to freedom. And they began to complain to Moses, and God crafted the scenario where their dependence on him would be necessary again. Where they took plunder out of Egypt. They took all the gold out of Egypt. They had favor, all those things. And so there was developing an arrogancy and a complaining mentality. Maybe not much different than what you experience when you are in the grocery store line or you hear other conversations at work. It seems like there's a lot of non-gratitude in our culture. And that was beginning to saturate the climate of Israel as they were in the desert. And so when Jesus is teaching this part of the prayer, he's saying to his disciples, give us this day, pray this to God, give us this day our daily bread. Quickly, their minds would go back to their study as kids to the Exodus 16 account where God provided manna from heaven, bread from heaven, food from heaven, and quail that came in from the west, and they would have bread and they would have meat, enough for each day. Matter of fact, they were to gather a certain number of omers, a weight of measurement, for each person who lived in the home, and in so doing, they were only to gather enough for each day, except on the sixth day, enough for the Sabbath, so that they wouldn't work. If you gathered too much, it would spoil. It would erode. It would spoil. What's that look like in our culture? How does that define or give freedom to our excess, to honor God with our wealth, to honor God with our excess? But more than that, how does that correlate with us loving and needing Christ for Him to be our daily provision in a spiritual, meaningful, dependent way daily. So as you gather with your life group, you're going to talk about some of these questions. You're going to talk about pieces of what the daily bread looks like. And I sincerely hope that you'll dive in without reservation. And again, you'll continue to put building blocks together that are familiar and close-knit and building off of each other from hallowing God's name and asking for His perspective, His agenda, His will in your life, and for Him now to be the provider of all your provisions, the giver, the sustainer, the one who makes a way for you every single day, to do the next right thing, to love God each and every day in a way that shows our world that who He is matters and that He counts to us. God bless you. Rock on as you study and meet in your group.